Are you a real estate investor looking to start your first flip? Are you a passive investor looking for the next opportunity? Regardless of your situation, our mission is to help everyone work towards their unique version of financial freedom. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Conduit Capital podcast. I'm your host, Adam Barreau, and today we are going to be continuing talking about the different things that are involved in funds and specifically with Conduit Capital, so that you have more knowledge when you're out there looking for investments and you know some of the better questions to ask. Now, the title of this episode is Money Bags because finally we get into what I think is the most fun stuff regarding funds, which is, how do you get paid? What do you get paid? The stuff to really look forward to. I mean, after all, that's kind of why you're looking to invest. You want to get your money out working. You want a good return on your money. I think it was my dad telling me when I was growing up that the best employees you'll ever have are dollar bills. They work harder than anyone else. They work 24/7, and they don't need benefits and they don't need vacation days. Investing in funds is a great way to get those dollars to work. Before I get into the fun stuff, though, there's just two kind of general things that I forgot to cover in past episodes that I want to go over because it's just more important things to consider before investing. So when you invest in funds, most funds will have a minimum investment, and it varies across the spectrum of what they require. So in Conduit Capital's case, for instance, minimum investment is $50,000. There are some funds that maybe they don't have a minimum, or it's it's something like 10,000. And that's definitely something to consider, especially if you want to get multiple, accounts invested, especially maybe you have a low dollar IRA that you're looking to get deployed. That might not be the best option for Conduit Capital if it's less than 50,000, but there are a lot of different options out there for people to get even those low dollar IRAs moving. Another thing to consider is, how long are your funds going to be tied up? This goes into, what sort of investor do you consider yourself? And also, what buckets, what investment buckets are you trying to fill? So, there are some funds that are a long-term play. As I mentioned in the last video, they can be 5 to 7 years. They can have profit sharing where you don't get your principal back. And there are other funds where I consider them more short-term. So Conduit Capital, I would consider a short-term fund. However, when Tom Olson and I were setting up the Conduit Capital Lending Fund, we wanted to give our investors the option where, if you wanted a shorter term play, short term in our case being 2-year minimum, you could absolutely have that. But also if you wanted a long term play where you wanted to kind of set it and forget it and have it be as passive as possible, we also wanted to offer that option too. So with Conduit Capital, we have a 2-year minimum investment with our investors. So that money is basically going to be locked with us for 2 years, and then you need to give us a 6-month notice if you need those funds back. At the 2-year mark, we'll go ahead and collect, when houses get paid back, we collect that money and we set that aside so that we know we're going to pay you back. And really our goal is to always pay our investors back as soon as possible. We're not going to sit on those funds if we don't have to. If we get them back to you sooner, we're always going to try to do that. But that's just kind of standard for funds to have some sort of minimum time period. That's really important to consider before you invest with someone because, like I said, if you find yourself, a year down the line and you're in a cash crunch and you really need those funds back, if you don't have a good relationship with the people or if you agreed to a really long-term investment, it's not likely that you're going to be able to get those funds back and you're going to have to search somewhere else. So it would be really unfortunate for investors to be stuck in a position where they have cash working out there that's theirs, but they actually don't have access to it. You really don't want to find yourself in the position where you're a slave to your investments. This is kind of a tangent, but something I've been thinking about lately is from personal experience. I've seen people out there, pursuing their version of financial freedom, which is Conduit Capital's goal to help our investors get there. But in searching for that financial freedom, in the pursuit of it, they get tied down with investments because maybe they didn't know the full breadth of what they were offering and what they were committing to. And as a result, they're locked in some way that actually restricts their freedom instead of expanding on it. So knowing the length of your investment is very important for that, as well as the process for withdrawing it. So if, like in our case, you need to give us a heads up, knowing that up front and being okay with that before you get too far down the line. Now that I got all of that, housekeeping stuff out of the way, now we get to talk about the fun stuff, which is, okay, where's the money? Money bags. So how much are they going to pay you? It's really important to get down to the brass tacks with your investment provider. I'm not going to speak too much on how people kind of advertise what their fund is offering. I think a lot of times, I compare it to like those car commercials that you see where they offer like a certain, rate, but it's not the actual rate that you end up getting because there's all these different fees in and all these different stipulations. So they're kind of saying, oh, this is kind of like the base level, but actually all this other stuff factors into it, and it's not quite what you're getting. I find it best, just ask them straight up and have the investment provider walk you through exactly what they plan on paying you. It was because of this frustration that I have, and this is a frustration shared by Tom Olson, our founder, which is why we wanted to structure our fund to be as simple as possible, so this is why we went the debt fund route, and this is why we pay out interest monthly. So we pay out 12% interest annually to our fund investors. It's a straight 12%. There's no profit sharing. There's no management fees charged. It's the straight 12%. So you're getting 1% a month from our fund, and that's ACH directly to the account that we receive the funds from. It's not super shiny. It's not super elaborate. It's not some brand new groundbreaking investment. It's meant to be tried and true, set it and forget it, passive investment. Now, if you don't consider yourself a passive investor, then it's probably not the right avenue for you. When I talk with new investors that are interested in learning more about our fund, I try to treat it as a two-way street. At Conduit Capital, we always want to raise more money from our investors because that really helps us expand our impact in Northwest Indiana as well as the other areas that we invest in. We love, the more money we have, the more capabilities we have to really make a difference in the areas that we invest in. But so that's one way on the street. The other way on the street, though, is I don't want investors to work with us under the incorrect pretenses. I want them to know exactly what they're getting into, and everyone has kind of a different tolerance level, and I'll talk more about this in a later podcast, but we want to make sure it's a good fit on both ends. We want to make sure it's a good fit for our investors, but I want to make sure it's a good fit for our company as well. So it's kind of like a two-way interview when I talk with investors, and I love when investors ask questions because we're able to, have a real conversation and get to the same understanding on what's being offered. So let's see. So that's how much they're going to pay you. And I just want to reiterate again because it's important. There's a lot of shiny, cool advertising things that you can do when promoting a fund, but ask them straight up. There's you can offer something, but what am I actually going to get? It's completely different. They can say, oh yeah, if we can offer you 18%, we're going to offer you 18%. But it's like, well, okay, what are you actually going to offer me if you don't perform at the level that you're expecting? That's a really important question to ask. For us, we offer all investors currently, as of February 2024, we are offering our investors 12%, and that's paid out in monthly payments. The next important part with receiving your money is how often are you going to receive distributions from your fund? There are some funds that, kind of disperse funds sporadically. Others, will give it all back to you at the end of the investment, maybe if it's something shorter term. Others are quarterly. In Conduit Capital's case, we do monthly interest payments. So really it's really up to you as the investor as far as, what kind of investment do you want. Something that I really like about our model and the monthly interest payments is that receiving the money in your account every month is kind of like its own little nudge of communication. Like, hey, just so you know, we're doing what we say we're going to do. Here's the funds that we agreed to. And that to expand on that, communication with investors is super important. And I'm always, as the fund manager, I'm looking for different ways that we can interact and show our investors kind of what's going on, maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but on a week-to-week basis, so they can see that, hey, the wheels are turning and we're not just raising money and paying you out with the money that we raise. That's called a Ponzi scheme, and that's very much illegal, which we want to stay as far away from as possible. I would really push your investment providers on this to give you specific dates. So for Conduit Capital, in our private placement memorandum, we state that interest payments are made on the 15th of every month. That just kind of works out for us because our borrowers make their payments on the 1st of the month. So we kind of have a gap to make sure that all the payments are received in the correct amounts before we pay our investors out on the 15th. And like I said, we are very, very diligent on following up with our borrowers and servicing those loans. It should also kind of detail what happens when they don't pay you. So unfortunately, because an investment is an investment, it's not a guarantee. It's always a risk. You run the risk of running into some tough times where maybe the investment provider has to pause distributions. While this is, of course, not ideal, unfortunately, sometimes it's part of the game. And you want to make sure that you have a relationship with your investment provider where communication doesn't just go dark when hard times hit. You want to make sure that there is lots of communication if those payments have to be paused, and you have to be ready for that. But ensuring that your principal is protected is always important too. And ensuring that your principal is protected, kind of going off that, the last point I want to mention here is make sure that the investment exists. I know it sounds super trivial. It's kind of this sole, it's a big deal. I don't know really how else to put it into words. Now that doesn't mean, especially if it's an investment in a different area of the country, maybe it's not feasible for you to go out and see it yourself, but there are always ways that you can get information that proves the investment exists. In Conduit Capital's case, so we have mortgages, first position liens on all of the properties that we lend on. So if a lender ever requests those from me, I can always provide them, but you can call the county, you can email the county and get a copy of that recorded mortgage, or you could fly out to Gary, Indiana, and I could give you a list of properties, and you could go out and see that they exist. This is something that I do when we lend on properties. I want to make sure that I'm lending on a house that exists, not a plot of land where a house used to exist. But it's just, it's one thing that you need to do to cover your bases. For me, it's kind of like that thing in the back of my head that if I can confirm that the investment actually exists, maybe I can sleep a little better at night knowing, hey, at the end of the day, it's an asset that I'm investing in, and it's an asset that exists. So that was kind of the fun stuff. So how you get to make your money in the fund. I hope you were able to take some stuff out of that. As always, if I left anything out or any additional questions you have, feel free to leave that in the comments. Don't forget to like our channel and our video, as well as follow us on social media and YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. Until next time, this has been the Conduit Capital Podcast. And remember, be a conduit, not a bucket. See you next time. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to stay up to date with all of our latest content, please follow us on social media. You can find us on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at Conduit Capital Podcast. We love hearing from our listeners, so feel free to send us a message, leave a comment, or share your thoughts with us.